Today we are going to start reading To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. First, I'm going to give you a little background on the story, the characters, and the setting, as well as go through summaries of chapters 1 through 3, as we will be skipping those chapters. Your teacher should have already played you this little video about e-notes, and that hopefully gave you a little taste about why we're reading this and what it's about. But now I'm going to go a little bit more in depth. Our author was born in 1926, so she would have grown up during the 1930s when this book was set. She was raised in a small town in Alabama called Monroeville, and her father was a lawyer. You're going to see a lot of parallels between her life and the life of the characters in the novel. Harper Lee has won many prizes and honorary degrees for her writings. She never wrote another book after To Kill a Mockingbird until 2015. She published a sequel to the book called Go Set a Watchman. This book was actually written before To Kill a Mockingbird, but the publishers wanted to see it from a little bit different perspective, so that's how we got To Kill a Mockingbird. Harper Lee died in February 2016, shortly after she published Go Set a Watchman. So the setting of the book takes place in a small town called Maycomb, Alabama. It's set in the 1930s during the Great Depression. The novel is also set during a time of complete segregation, meaning that blacks and whites had a different set of rules. This was a time of heavy racism where African Americans were not allowed to be at the same schools, the same churches, as white people. This novel is inspired by true events. So when I say inspired, it's not based on. It's just ideas and perspectives were taken into account when the book was written. So being based on and inspired are two different things. So the town of Maycomb is a fake town. It's not real, but it's inspired by the town that Harper Lee grew up in Monroeville, Alabama. She kind of set up the same rural farming town. The way the town is laid out with where the courthouse, the houses are, is set up like her town. In the novel, one of the main plots is going to be a criminal trial of a character named Tom Robinson. His case is based off of a real-life court case, or I guess inspired by a real-life court case called the Scottsboro Boys case. And we will be reading an article, watching videos about that before we get into the trial. The main character of the novel, Scout, is also based off of Harper Lee, or inspired by her, not in the sense that they had the same childhood, the same life, but Harper Lee has a lot of the same perspective and asks a lot of the same questions that Scout did about the way society works. Now we're going to talk about the setting. So Maycomb, Alabama is in the South. The South, if we look on the map, you can see kind of the area that encompasses, is a very different culture than we have up here in Indiana. Especially back in the 1930s, the culture of the community is very different. So in the 1930s, the South would have been heavily Christian. That was kind of the main belief system. So you'll see that reference in the book. You'll see church referenced. And there wasn't a lot of diversity in religion at that time. There's a lot of history that took place in the South. The Civil War, the actual battles were fought there. We'll see a lot with the history of race relations, tensions. The South was the main area where slavery took place in the South, and we'll see that they're still recovering from that. The climate, warm, humid all the time. We'll see references to the climate as well. There's also a sort of class system in Maycomb, Alabama. A class system is basically when different groups of people are ranked based on, what they have, and some people are considered better than others, and their treatment is based on where they rank. So in Maycomb, Harper Lee wants us to see this because it kind of plays out in how people are treated. There's the land class, people who own land, usually white men. The educated class, people who have more professional degrees. Townspeople, people who live in town, maybe work blue-collar jobs. Then farmers. Then the poor white people. These are people who, they're not farmers. They might have do odd jobs, maybe need assistance to live. And we'll meet the Yules. They're the main family that fall into this class. And then finally would be the African Americans, and that just shows kind of how people judge others and also the extent of the racism of this time. A couple things that are important to understand about this, cliche small town Southern society is that in this small town of Maycomb, everyone knows everybody. They know your business. They gossip about your business. That's kind of something that this town does. The church is at the center of the social scene of Maycomb, so we'll kind of see that especially later on when we meet Scout's aunt, that church groups, ladies groups, functions, those are kind of the only social scene. There's not a lot of entertainment. This took place during the Great Depression, so people are poor, and you don't know a lot about, there's not a lot to do. Kids don't have a lot of toys. Instead, they have to make up games, find objects like tires to use as toys. So you won't really see a lot of entertainment. Another thing that's important to note is that people were often judged by what their family did in the past. So if your family was considered or screwed up or did something, you're pretty much judged by what your family did, and it's hard to break that judgment. And we will see that theme throughout the book. Another thing that's important to note is that it was very common for people who had a bit more money to hire African American women to come into their homes, raise their children, take care of them, clean, cook, handle a lot of the discipline. Now this was more, this wasn't common for everyone, especially in Maycomb. Maybe very few families had that because they didn't have the money. But I just want to point this out because Gem and Scout, they do have a nanny. Her name's Calpurnia. However, they treat Calpurnia like family, but that wasn't the case in all Southern households. A lot of times these women were treated very poorly, not paid what they should have been paid. Another thing to note is sharecroppers. So you guys are going to read an article about this as we get a little further along. But sharecropping is basically a type of farming where when slavery ended, they needed to create a way the government wanted to create a way for former enslaved people to get on their feet, to get a job. And basically what they ended up doing is working for landowners, usually former slave owners, but instead of working for free, they were supposed to get a portion of the crops or profits. But that wasn't always the case. It was basically a way of keeping poor people poor. And we'll talk more about that as we read an article this week. Another thing with Southern society, as we'll see as you get into the novel a little bit more, was, especially when we meet Gem and Scout's aunt, is if you were rich or well off, women, they didn't work, their jobs looked pretty, participate in ladies groups and teas, supervise the household, and that was kind of the goal, and that's kind of what Scout's aunt wants for her. But we'll learn as we meet Scout, our main character, that that is not what she wants. It was very common for men to go to work at this time. Men would work. Women worked if they had to or needed to, but most women, the goal was to not have to do that. But a lot of women did work outside the home, but only if they were, if they really needed to, usually, especially in these small towns. If you were poor and the woman didn't work, she usually was at home taking care of the kids. doing household chores and that sort of thing.